What is up, Team Eternal? Welcome to another EPL Eternal Logos podcast. We're back live in the studio, just like I promised. This is another episode, another installment. It is the end of November, so I think I have 2 or 3 more before we get out of the year, and so I'm really excited to have this episode rolling. Hopefully, you guys are having a good holiday season. Christmas is right around the corner, so that's exciting. I love Christmas. It's actually my favorite holiday. That could actually probably be a topic in the future, and you could probably hear some laughter from my guest. But we're going to introduce my guest in a second. I'm excited to have her in the podcast. This has been one that's been brewing for some time now. It's probably been brewing for about a year or so.
Yeah.
So I've been really, really excited about this one. Of course, like I always say, subscriptions and liking are optional. Commenting is mandatory. Make sure you tune in. Make sure you give us your thoughts, opinions about what we're going to have a conversation about today. She's going to introduce a topic in a second, but I wanted to make sure I got all that good stuff out of the way. Again, so glad you guys have tuned in again. Hope you're enjoying the platform. Next year is going to be amazing, and we're going to do a couple more before the year is out. So without further ado, I have my friend Shae
Hey.
in the studio. This is someone I met in the gym. I mean, how long have we known each other?
A little over a year now.
A little over a year, yeah. So we were going to do a podcast once before, and just life happened or whatnot, and so it never came to fruition. And so nearing the end of the year, and she had some time, so I was like, let's actually get in the studio and have a conversation. And so this is going to be really fun for me because I don't think you've ever done a podcast before, have you?
No.
You're just telling me that she was thinking about doing a podcast with someone she knows, and so this will be a good first time experience. She'll get the, under the wings, under her, the wind or so, and we'll try to get her to actually start one because I think podcasting is fun and exciting. She listens to podcasts, I listen to podcasts, and apart from that as well, too, we've had many conversations. Obviously not on camera, but in our developing friendship, and we've learned quite a bit about each other, and we've had a lot of deep conversations. And so way back when, that's kind of where it started. I was like, well, it'd be great to have a conversation actually on, because I have a podcast.
Right.
And she was like, okay, let's do it. And so we were hoping to actually have somebody else on when we did it, but they couldn't make it. I think they're out of town. Boy G, he'll be on the podcast hopefully sometime soon. And then maybe we'll have a trio, and then maybe 4 people, because there are a number of people I'm going to bring on the podcast that Shae knows. And Shae actually met all these people before me. Shae actually, this could probably be a whole topic. So Shay's like the friend that connects all other friends. Like she's like the bridge. And so everybody who you've met or have, when you've tuned in, some of the people I've met in the gym, they probably met Shae before they met me. And Shae probably introduced me to them in some way, in some indirect way.
Well,
I
when
think
did
maybe
you start going there?
it was just moved out here, out here. And so it's,
We moved here around the same time.
that's right. Cause you've been living where you're living for about 2 years.
December
now.
2022.
Yeah. So there you go. It's written in the stars. Speaking of that, so I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself. Just your name, sort of maybe where you come from, if you have any social media. Oh, by the way, I always say this. Shae is a beast in the gym, and I don't say that lightly. I'm serious. Like I've said that like 2 or 3 times with like some other podcasts. So, but no, Shae is a beast. I promise you. She's going to plug her social media, and you can go see her page, and you will see what I'm talking about. So introduce yourself.
So my name is Shae, and I'm from Guam. And what else did you want me to say?
Yeah, if you introduce your social media, you got a social media handle.
I think it's Shae Janae.
I think that's right. Is there a period or anything?
No.
I'll make sure it's in there. You'll see I'll do a pop-up.
Because I have a personal one, but that's my fitness one.
Yeah.
So follow.
And I'll make sure it'll be in the description as well too. So one thing I always like to say, or ask rather, on the podcast is like to ask for the person's worldview. Sort of what worldview perspective that you come from. Some people obviously have their worldview in religion. Some people are non-believers, right? So it's a big question to ask someone, but I try to contextualize it. I think that helps to contextualize the conversation as we move forward, because if there's something that we talk about and I'm like, oh, your worldview said it was this, and I try to point out logical inconsistencies if I hear them, right? Because that kind of helps people to understand, especially the viewer, because this podcast is about discovering the truth, and the best way you can do this is self-reflection. So whatever conclusion you have, right?
Yeah.
You've heard me talk about this before, but just as a reminder, so what is your worldview? How would you describe it?
I mean, I'm really like faith-based. Like everything is just all about my faith. And I think everything that's happened in my life by far, I will always look at it as a testimony of my faith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So faith-based. So is it like a specific religion? So like, do you
I mean,
subscribe to?
for me, I think that's just such a, I don't know, for that question, because I was born and raised Catholic, right? I was baptized Catholic, but like right now I go to a non-denominational church, and I think I'm just open to all religions. Like as long as you believe in something, it's really just
Yeah.
okay.
Is that being from Guam? Is that something that's pretty normal in Guam to grow up
Yeah.
Catholic? Is that the
Like predominantly Catholic,
religious capital of Guam?
Yeah, because like we go by villages, and like every village has their own church, and it's a Catholic church. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
it's
Yeah, that
really,
makes sense. That
yeah.
contextualizes as well too. Yeah, from the islands. That's it. And Shae, I think you visit quite a bit, obviously home.
Yeah.
And I think you recently went not too long ago.
Yeah, in May this year.
And so because of Shae, I have a lot of fresh perspectives on some things. She doesn't know necessarily that she's giving me these fresh perspectives, because like when you talk about like politics and things like that, again, which can be another whole conversation, but it gives you perspectives. She like went back to Guam and she's just like, cereal's like $11. And I'm like, that's
literally, it really was. Orange juice was $12
yeah.
just for the jug. Didn't realize I spent that much on orange juice. I was like, yeah, your orange juice is usually $4.
Ballin'.
I was like, whoa, that was not $4.
But yeah, no, it's giving me a fresh perspective, as I think, especially in this political climate. People talk about like, I'm going to move somewhere. I'm like, where are you going to move to? And people don't necessarily know that if you go to a place like Guam or the islands, how much more expensive living
Hawaii.
is, and just the cost of
Hawaii
living.
was extremely expensive.
Yep.
But I lived there for 6 years, but I also went Guam to Hawaii. So I didn't realize how expensive it was till I came back here.
Yeah.
Then I went back to Hawaii and I was like, yeah. Why is a plate of pancakes $20? That's a little unnecessary.
That's crazy. For three, a stack is $20.
No, it really was.
Wow.
It was crazy expensive.
Yeah.
So
maybe that you can come back and we can talk about that before. But okay, so Shae, we have your Instagram. We know where you're from. We know your worldview. What is the topic of today? You can even switch it up on me if you want. You're like, you know what? I decided.
I don't know. How do we word it?
You said faith and science, something like that. You can do like origin of humanity, or you said you're faith-based, right? And so that is, I mean, that's a conversation that happens in the podcasting world just in general. It's been one of the biggest topics throughout human history, right?
Yeah.
Is there a God?
It's very debatable.
What's beyond this world?
What is the start of life?
Yeah. And obviously that's very, very much, where you come from, your values and all that stuff will be influenced by, which side of that debate you fall on, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll say, okay, so she kind of tipped me off a little bit about the topic, which is okay. So faith and science. Okay. So you said you were having a conversation recently with someone,
Yeah.
and sort of kind of how did that conversation go? Like, what side of the fence do you stand on, or what's your like perspective on science and faith, or science or faith?
It's really like hard, right? Because I think science has a lot to do with it, but we lean into our faith when science doesn't pull through.
Right.
I should say, right? I mean, because you look at right now, I know a lot of women who are having fertility issues, right? So then then science kicks in, right? So there's all these different ways to, try and conceive. But, then we lean into like, if it doesn't happen, or then it comes to, we got to pray on it.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't part of our plan. This is not part of God's plan. So it's like,
yeah,
it's kind of hard to really say. And I think the perspective someone and I had spoke about was, without faith, there is no science.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it without science, there is no faith?
Tough talk. Hold on. Before we continue, actually, I forgot this last episode too. Sorry, guys. This is the ceremonial flip of the hourglass.
Oh.
Authentic hour. hourglass.
That's awesome.
And
I
so
was
it
wondering
kind of
why you had
gives
just like an
us,
hour there.
yeah, it's a nice prop to have. It keeps time, but it also, is something for if people can see it in the camera, you
That's
know,
cool.
that people
But
can pay attention to. So, okay, so let me ask you this. So that does like that's interesting, right? And I feel that most people at some level, like even people who are non-believers, you know, they believe in something,
mm-hmm.
right? There is some perspective that they have, or rather, um, faith is not a religious word, is what I'm sort
Mm-hmm.
of getting at, right? And I think, at least in modern times, a lot of people hold the position that it is, but it's not, right? Like you said, if like for instance, you have to have faith that science works,
Yeah.
right? Like, and I love actually talking about this. That's one of my favorite topics, because if you don't have faith in that science will work, right? You get sick, you take medications or whatever the case may be. You have to believe that it's possible at some level, which is faith, right? And so faith comes from a Latin word fides, and it called, also from a biblical perspective, pistis is another word where it comes from, and it's stem, and basically means, in some sense, trusting on evidence, right?
Yeah.
Like you believe that something's going to happen, right? You have faith that it's going to happen because you have good reason for doing so, right? There's some evidence there, right? Do you sort of agree with that, or do you feel like
Well,
some people
yes,
say blind faith,
right?
right? Some people
And that's why
take
I'm
it to
like,
the
well, then
extreme.
that's also like science, right? So
Yeah.
I do agree. Faith is, what do they say? Faith is the absence of.
It comes in James. Faith is the.
It's the absence of
Well, no,
knowing.
it's faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen.
Yes, there you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
And so I think that, you know, like I said, science, you have to, like you said, faith, you have to have faith that it's going to work. And so I just don't feel like they can be separated, really.
Right.
I don't know.
So what was the debate about? What debate were you having?
The debate was really, does life start from a man or a woman?
What'd you say?
A woman.
All right, what's your reasoning?
Because the sperm has to, meet the egg.
Right.
It's like a sperm is just a sperm. But then also the egg is just an egg without a sperm.
Right.
Right? So at the end of the day, it's like an egg cannot, I don't know.
Yeah. I kind of think about it like this, right? Like the sperm is like the seed.
Yeah.
And the egg is like the soil, right? You obviously need both. The soil provides the nutrients, and the environment, so that the sperm or the seed can develop, right? And so from that perspective, if you think about the seed being like the life form, right, and the thing, then you would have the whoever's arguing, and I guess I would probably argue that's probably from maybe a scientific perspective.
Well, not necessarily, because then Adam came up and was like, well, Adam came before Eve.
So yeah, science and faith says man. No, I'm kidding. No, okay, so no, that's okay, so we can go in a number of different directions, right? So let's stick with the science real fast. As well as I can. I'm no scientist, no biologist whatsoever, but if you just take just that bit, that the sperm is sort of the seed, that's where the life is, right? Fair. And so if it's planted in that sense, you obviously need both, because without the environment, without the nutrients, without the growth, and then obviously women carry the growing seed, right? So then obviously if there's no man, you don't have, nothing's planted, and if you don't have a woman, nothing is there to be planted in, right, to be fertilized. Obviously, science is advancing, right? Like babies can be made in tubes and all of this kind of stuff that's happening nowadays, which is crazy to think about. But from that perspective, I would say man is the one that plants the life, but women are the ones that obviously deliver the life, right? So women are the carriers, right? And so, and also too, I think this
Well,
extends like it's further, like when you talk about like the nurturing of a child, like that's very important, especially we talk about like breastfeeding and those things that like becomes very, very important for the development of the child. You know what
well,
I
I
mean?
think
So
it
you're like
also
life
comes.
sustainers.
I don't understand like the whole sperm count situation.
Hmm.
So, I know someone who had fertility issues, but then it turns out it was the man's fault,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
then, but
I
then
really wish I knew more, like molecular at the molecular level. 'Cause it is true, like you can
we
have
don't
a
have deep
deficiency
knowledge
in.
on this topic. I don't think we have enough evidence to say which one is wrong or
Right.
right.
But I think in essence though, there is something to be debated here, especially at the faith
Absolutely.
level, right? Because I do think that especially when you talk about like relationships, and that's a massive topic right now.
Hmm.
You talk about sort of the role of men and women,
Hmm.
right? And it starts at this point
Hmm.
in the development of a child, the conception of a child, and ultimately the development. And so, from a faith perspective, like if we say, well, Adam came first, right? Like, um, then you would then whether you believe in God or not, so to speak, right? Like woman, we're known as mankind, right? And I think that may be a religious idea just historically, so to speak. So if you do take that angle,
I was like, I don't know.
what do you disagree with?
Mankind, womankind.
Womankind? You prefer to say womankind?
I mean, it just goes so far though, because right now, this day and age, right, there's so much debates on men and women,
Right.
that exact topic.
Right. Do you think that ultimately has spiritual roots in the sort of
Yes.
back and forth between men
Yes,
and women?
I
Right.
do. I do believe that.
Right. Where like what's your take on, because in my mind, so if we're dividing two lines here, right, we're saying from a faith perspective, you can think about, at least from a traditionally,
Mhm.
right, from a biblical perspective, we'll say, 'cause that's what I'm most knowledgeable on. God is over man, man over woman, woman
Mhm.
over child, etc. Right. From you can think about that. Okay, so once we have that, then you have the science side, which is just kind of like, okay, well, you have psychology and biology. We're talking about
Mhm.
conception of children. Um, and which is actually a really interesting idea from a religious perspective, right? Because the Bible talks about the conception is it's through the will of men,
Yeah.
right, that babies are born, right? So there's a connecting point there. But then you also, like I said, have the psychology, right? And so the psychology, especially in conception, and how a man is through his will is
Mhm.
planting a seed in a woman. So
Yeah.
when a baby is born, that just the whole dynamic of psychology is just one could argue psychologically, you start to get this roles thing that is obviously a big debate and topic.
Absolutely.
Right. And so I think this is where science and faith line up very, very
Fair.
right. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
they seem to line up.
Hmm.
We think.
I think that um, it does. I think there's just a lot of science to it that's coming like this day and age, right? With like advances in technology, rather,
Yeah.
that it just takes out so much faith from it. I feel like,
Hmm.
especially with, okay, so there's a lot of women who, have fertility issues, so they go into science, right?
Hmm.
But you have people who are just like, I want a girl. So then they go into science and they're like, now you can like pick the gender, you can pick the hair color. I don't know, all
Right.
these different things. And you're
Yeah.
like, wait.
Yeah.
And then it's like, God gave me a girl. And it's like, well, I don't think that's fair to say. God gave me
Right.
this healthy, beautiful baby girl, being granted you did, grow that child in you. But like,
Right.
you kind of use science to make this image of what you wanted, not what
Hmm.
God said is for you.
Yeah. Do you think it's immoral? You think it's an immoral thing to do?
Um, I think attributing it to God is,
Mm.
you can't man make something, and then say God did it.
Right. Well, scientifically, that's what sort of like the selection process is all about, right? Like, for instance, you see somebody you're like interested in them, like, oh, I want to talk to them, and that's what mating's all about. Like, you're basically selecting.
Fair.
Like I basically
Well, I'm talking about conceiving in general, right?
yeah. So you're saying like, do you like genetic alterations?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what I'm talking about. Like
Yeah.
specifically genetic alterations, saying like, I want to pick the gender I want to pick, what color, hair, whatever. Like, you're literally just making a baby.
Yeah. That's a, yeah.
I think that's when like faith is taken out of it. And then saying, you know, God created this baby. It's like, no, you handpicked that one.
Right.
Is that fair to say? I don't know. I
Yeah.
think as a woman, you know, as well as someone who, you know, has conceived a child, it's like, no, you have, like, that's faith. That's trusting God's going to give you a healthy baby. You know, you ask, you know, anybody, like, do you want a boy or a girl? That's usually the first question people ask, right? When they find out you're having a child, or when you speak of kids. And, you know, before you're pregnant, it's like, oh, I want a boy, I want a girl. When you're pregnant, all you're like, I just want a healthy baby. Like, that's all you could think. Or I want to reach full term, right? That's when, like, it's true faith. Like, you're just putting straight faith into that. A lot of people don't announce their pregnancies very early on. And I personally didn't either, because it took me about over a year to conceive, right? I had lost hope. I really had believed that I just could not conceive. And when I found out I was pregnant because I was sick, it didn't even cross my mind, because I literally had lost hope that I could be pregnant. And I was like, I would always get very nauseous when I'm about to get my period. And someone was like, are you pregnant? I was like, no, I can't be. Like, there's no way. And like, after, a year and some change trying, I actually was able to conceive. And so I think that was, you know, at the time, I've always been big on my faith, but I just say, like, it is, God knows what he's doing, because my life was not set up in the times that I was trying, even though, like, mentally I was like, I want a child. I was not able to conceive. And I mean, I wasn't even living in the same place as him. I had like a studio. I didn't even have bedrooms in my apartment, you know? And at that time I was like, I want a child, and I could not conceive. And at the time I did, I was settled into my career. I had got, you know, my first apartment. It was a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. And, you know, financially I was in a better place. And so, like, that's when it really hit me. Like, for me, that was like my testimony. Like, it's God. Like, God knew what he was doing. It wasn't a matter of science. I think in the beginning, like, prior to me, I think that was all in hindsight, right? That it was science. I could not conceive. Something was wrong with my body.
Okay, so let me ask, because there's a interesting nugget of a question in there. What role do you feel like science plays in a faith-based reality, right? So, like, let's just say, for the sake of argument, and if you're a non-believer, just for the sake of argument, that there is a God, right? What role do you think science plays, right, in helping along, so to speak, certain biological inconsistencies or issues or things that may happen or pop up?
I mean, like, ultimately, there's a lot of things that can be contributed to that, right? Like, one, it wasn't the right time, right? I wasn't ovulating. You're not going to conceive unless you're ovulating, right? Stress, right? Was it just extremely stressful situations? A lot around the time I was trying, it was also like COVID, and there was a lot going on with the Black Lives Matter movement. Like, that was all during that time. And I was in Seattle, so it was like really rough out there. And I think just the stress of it could absolutely contribute to that, right? So that I think faith, becomes a matter of perspective.
Side note, by the way, so obviously men, I'm gonna speak to the men don't understand fully the biological processes involved in the period and the stages. And I've recently been educated, like I've received some education.
Okay. What was your source?
So from a woman. And it helped me to understand, like, ovulation, right? And that I didn't realize that you couldn't get pregnant unless you were ovulating. I thought it, like, at any moment. Which is a huge that could be a huge topic of conversation, because for like just reasons in terms of, like, pregnancies and children that are born, the number of children that are born, people aren't when they're having kids and they're not ready to have kids, right? It's just like, you know what I mean? Like, there's a whole podcasting episode conversation just came up to my mind when I learned more about it.
It's all about timing.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for teaching me.
Yeah, I mean, it's really all about timing, and that's where, like I said, that's where you can draw that line of faith and science, right?
Yep. Yep.
Because and the thing is too, people are irregular, right? Like you can go 3 months without your period. That also means you're not ovulating,
Right.
but then you're consistent. Like I was a very irregular person, and so like then you're consistent, and so that could play a huge role.
Yeah.
But like I said, those factors like stress and stuff, that could absolutely affect your cycle.
Right. That's so interesting. It really is, like, because if you like, I would love to know the data and the statistics of the I'm sure some scientist out there has put together like
Absolutely.
the probability of getting pregnant. Like, you know what I mean? Like when you, and of course there's like fertility levels. Like if a woman's, I'm making this up, like 50% fertile and the man's 50% can impregnate at a 50%, like whatever fertility stuff exists at the man's level biologically, right? It's like, what's the percentage chance of you having a child, you know what I mean, when those are the factors, you know what I mean? Because then you would really pull in. So like, let's just say the probability is like you got a 2% chance of getting pregnant, like during your ovulating moment of your 3-year cycle. And that seems like it would seem to me that I already think that like conception of a child and development of a child is already a miracle. But it would be really, if it was like 2%, somebody Google the facts and like send them my way. Like Google it, put it in the comments, because I really want to know like what the probability is and at what fertile levels.
Yeah, that part I don't understand, because like shortly before I found out I was pregnant, I did want to go like get checked. I didn't even know what I was supposed to check for, right? Even as a woman, I didn't know. I was like, I'm going to go to a gynecologist and figure out like, can I get pregnant? What do I need to do to get pregnant?
Yeah.
But, and even with the men, I don't know, like, what does it take for when they say like the man is the issue, like what is the actual issue?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm sure the biological answers to that, scientific answers are probably infinite and innumerous. It's like anything can go wrong. It's like either your sperm count can be low, your actual sperm itself can probably be, you know what I mean, like deficient in some way. It's probably a ton of things. Stress is probably a factor. Like, well, how stressed are you in life right now?
Well, then they say those things, right? But then there's so many different ways to conceive. They're like, okay, so you take the sperm and they take her egg and they like scientifically like, put it, and then they put it back in her, and then you're just like, you're like, wait, how did that even?
Yeah.
Why couldn't it just naturally collide? Right? Like, what is stopping it?
Yeah.
Faith.
Exactly.
God's plan.
Yeah.
And then we're
Something
like, no, we're going to use
involved.
science to recreate God's plan.
Right.
Right. That's really that's really the reality of it, right? I mean, if you have that mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. God's timing. Yeah. So let's take us in a direction of, what do you think from a faith-based perspective when we talk about men and women conceiving children and ultimately having families? What do you think the role from a faith perspective is for men and women when it comes to conception and children? It seems like that's the road we're on, which I think is a great topic.
Yes.
Creation of families is something that we should probably talk more about in society today, right? And what that looks like. So what do you think the role of men and women is from a faith-based perspective?
I think that's actually a really good question. I feel like my perspective's a little biased because
that's all right.
I am a single mom, but I think forgive me if I go off topic a little.
No worries.
Because I think the idea of what those roles are is really going to be based off of your upbringing, right? And I didn't have a very present mother or father. And so I think now as a parent, it was, my son's only 3, so it's learning the different roles as we kind of go. His father was raised in a very like loving home, mother and father very present, right?
Yeah.
And so I think me trying to learn and unlearn certain things I think a lot of times it came down to, or when I speak to people, right, it comes down to who's the disciplinarian, right? I think
Yes.
naturally,
Yep.
they say mothers are kind of like the coddlers. They're supposed to be loving. The fathers are supposed to be that disciplinarian.
Yep.
And I think, that is kind of my perspective because like as a mom, it is really hard. Like his dad can yell at him and I'm like, yo, don't yell at my son, but I, absolutely have to discipline at certain times. But I think it goes to, I think the roles are really changing this day and age, right? Because back then, mothers kind of stayed home, right? And I know my mom did. She didn't work for, many years. And my dad like went to work. He did, he brought in the money. My mom took care of the household. And like that's not what it is anymore, right? Many moms and dads are both working now.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of changes the dynamic and it becomes more of an equal shared, equal role within the home. Like disciplinarian is whoever's present. And I think it's shared roles now.
Yeah.
I really think that's what it is.
Yeah.
I don't think it comes down to one or the other, but ultimately, like, I do truly believe that mothers are kind of like, they're just supposed to be those nurturers, like naturally.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
So faith and science, like we started there as a broad topic, but I'm glad we went down this road because I think this is, and I mentioned it before, I think this is one of those areas where I think faith and science like go very like the most obvious hand in hand, right? Because I think science supports the biblical ideas if you come from a Bible-based perspective, and I think those ideas can be fleshed out conceptually in Scripture, but also, like again, the scientific evidence. So so that's actually interesting. So I think this is my take on it. I do believe that I think roles, and speaking of, right, you said the entrance and the advancements of science have helped to make the roles a little bit more balanced, right? So I do think there is a bit more balance than there used to be, right?
Absolutely.
Just by nature of evolution, social evolution, and those things. But I do believe that those roles there's something about them that's real and fact-based in the sense that I don't think, for instance, that I just don't believe that men can be as good of a nurturer as a woman. I just don't.
I think y'all have it in you.
Yeah, I just, you know what I mean? Like we can do and we can try, but it's something about the touch of a woman, right? Like I always say, I think men are in some way, shape, or form monsters to a degree, and I think women really can help to make a man, so you have men, and I think you have villains and you have heroes. I think women can really take a man and either push him to be a villain or push him to be a hero. And I think that's just the nurturing quality of women, like that nourishment that you give, that care, right? So, and again, Shae is the one in the group that kind of brings everybody together. Like I just don't have that desire in me. I could do it, you know what I mean? But it's just the desire is not there. And so I think that's something that's just very real.
I think something I realized too is I think so, like, for example, right, they say like mothers, fathers, they say like become fathers when the baby's born, right? You're like, oh my God, like I'm a dad. Versus like moms, like we're carrying this baby, right, for 9 months. And so like that thing doesn't just click when the baby's out. It's like this, we've created this whole child for like 9 months, and so that's something I had to remember too when my son was born. It's like it clicked for me. Like things just kind of felt natural. Yeah. Versus his dad, I'm like, he has to learn. Like he didn't carry this kid, right? Like
so you mean I have to feed it every day?
Yeah, like you can walk around. So not to say like a dad doesn't remember his wife is pregnant, right? But you can walk around and you could maybe even forget like she's pregnant, but like you as a woman, you're not going to forget you're pregnant, right? You're carrying this child with you. And so true, it's like it's just instinctual for us. It's different when like, if it's your child, it's your child, but it's different when like you literally, like when I look at my son, I'm like, I grew like hands and feet in me, like a whole body, a whole head, it's always going to be,
amazing.
It's going to be very different. I think, my faith in everything just grew tenfold, like creating a child, bringing this child to life. Like you look at this child I nursed and it's like, this kid could literally live off of me. And me alone, you know? And his dad always says, he's like, you are his lifeline.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, without you, there is no him.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I also had him when there was a formula shortage. And I was able to, you know, I didn't have to deal with that because I was able to nurse.
Yeah.
And so it's just things like that, like naturally. I mean, as a father, what would you know, there's so much you can't.
Good point. That is actually a really good point.
If it was
I guess
just
point for women, I guess.
it was just you and you alone. I mean, there's ways to make it work, obviously.
Yeah.
But to know, even as a woman, it just gives you so much just confidence and loving yourself that you're able to do that.
Yeah.
You know? So.
If you were in a debate, that is an excellent point. Something I had never thought about. Or what if you're locked in a house and you can't get out, or you're locked in a room or whatever? Like a mom can actually sustain a child where a man would not be able to, right? Unless you want to eat like wood or something.
Water only lasts so long.
Obviously a hypothetical purely. Okay, so that is a good point. Okay, so what do you think is the biological thing, psychological thing, or physiological thing that men bring that women can't, right? Like women nurture, can nurse, right? That's a, right? Like, what do you think?
That's a very good question. If anything.
Like, what do you do?
That's a tough one. Can you say as a man what you think?
I can say what I think. You know, also another point I wanted to bring this up, this just came to mind. So when you were talking about just women being pregnant for 9 months, there's a period of time, and I don't know the trimesters and all that, but there's a period of time where it's just, I'm just not sure. You know, I just, something I probably have to learn in the future. Continue to really educate me, please.
Absolutely.
But there's a period of time where you could be pregnant for like 5 months and I not even know. Like if you're my wife, you know what I mean? Like I could not even know that you're pregnant, which is kind of crazy to think about. Like, cause I don't think women start to show on average till what month?
It depends. It really, I got so sick in the beginning. I don't think I showed till about maybe almost 7 months.
That's crazy. You pregnant for your wife can be pregnant for 7 months and you not know.
Yeah. Some people are really small. Some people don't show till later, like right when they're about to pop. Or, you know, some people are larger in size, and so you may not ever know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Right. So back to the question.
Yeah.
What I think men provide, so I think there's the obvious that women get pregnant for 9 months. And so for 9 months, you're basically you really need protection, right? Like from a historical perspective, for sure, right? Like back when there were no locks on doors, you know what I mean? Like it's like you're very, very vulnerable in this 9 month time period. And so women heavily rely, and obviously by extension, the child heavily relies on the protection of the father and be able to also help sustain and provide for the mother so that she can actually nourish the kid that is in her belly for those 9 months.
I can agree with that.
Point. Let's go. Somebody keep score.
I think that's gonna bring on another topic later, but I mean, it just comes down to like being a woman in this world, right? Will I protect my son to the ends of this earth? Yes, but let's say we go somewhere and the situation seems sketch. I know that as long as his father is there, we're gonna feel safe and protected.
Yeah.
If it's us alone, am I probably scared out of my ass? Absolutely. But I'm going to do what I have to do to protect my son, right? But can a man bring that protection? Absolutely. I can agree with that.
Yes. Yes.
That was actually a really but again, it's coming from a man, right? So
exactly. I got us, boys.
I think, again, it's a little biased because I am the protector in my home.
Right.
But like I said, with his father present, like we do feel a different sense of protection when he is around.
Yep. Okay, so after pregnancy, once the child is born, where do you think the roles fall? You said disciplinary usually falls to the father. I think I also conceded that I think women are just better nurturers. So I think even, after the child is born, you keeping the child close to you is very important. I think there's been psychological studies done on that too, right?
Absolutely.
Like that without that connection in those crucial years, early stages of a child's development, if they don't get a certain number of hugs or touches a day or get that closeness that can significantly impact like their psychology growing up.
Yeah.
Right?
I think it also comes down to the gender of the child, right? My role is going to be a little different if I had a daughter versus a dad's role is going to be a little different if he had a son or a daughter, right?
Yeah.
The as a man, you're going to teach your daughter what like a man, what type of man she should have in her life, right? Growing up. As a son,
important.
it's he has to now teach him how to be a man.
Yep.
And it would be the same for me, right? I am now an example of what my son should look for. I have to be that role model for him when he gets older. Versus if I had a daughter, it's how are you going to be, present yourself as a wife. And so I really think that role each parent plays comes down to like the gender as well. Like I think that plays a significant impact really on the role.
And what do you how do you think that happens? Like, so let's just say there's a daughter. How do you think how does he go about teaching a daughter what a man's role in the family unit looks like and how she should see and interpret the other men in her life as she grows and develops, when she starts dating, when she starts looking for a husband? Like, what do you think it actually looks like practically, like on a daily basis? What should the man be doing?
Okay, in short, is more leading by example, right? I think that's a big thing. For example, my son, I have a son, right? So, like his father's role right now is showing him how to respect me as a woman, right? I mean, it can be something as simple as like if my son answers back, he's like, that's not how you talk to your mother, right? And it could be something as simple as opening the door for, I think my role as a mother for him, I teach him to like, I guess it's really hard because men are supposed to be this like tough whatever, right? And I try to bring out that softness in him. I'm always like, you say thank you, you say please. Even today a little girl wanted a sticker and she was in front of him and I was like, hey, ladies first. Like I'm teaching him to like be a gentleman. But I really think it comes down to like leading by example. I teach him how to be kind to others. Hey, like we're holding the door open for someone. Just saying hi to people, right? His dad is kind of like to himself, like that's just his personality. And I'm all like, hey, that's my personality. And so those are kind of like how I, lead that example for him and how he should treat other people. His dad will do things like, making sure I get in the car first, making sure I'm safe when I drive away, like making sure I drive all the way out. Making sure the house is locked, just little things like that because my son is 3. But
they're always
I
watching,
think it starts there.
They're watching.
Yes, it starts there by just showing. And it can be, I feel like my son already gets that. Like you protect mom. His dad can be playing with me, and if he's his dad do anything to me, it could be jokingly. He will go and attack his dad. Like he is a true mama's boy.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And then mom's role is probably also leading by example. Like, what does she do?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, again, that's also comes down to, I'm like a very independent, woman, and that could be seen in very different ways. But
I think it does to you, Shae, actually. So this is what I love about Shae. Like, Shae is very, very down to earth. Like I said, we've had many conversations before about this, and there's a lot of ideas that I have that I think are probably a little more traditionally leaning, and like I don't necessarily get pushback from Shae on most of those points, right? Like there's already obviously a lot of agreement, and I'm trying to like find a right, but she said she's independent, because obviously she's a single mom, and there's some factors there that have probably brought that along, in your development as well as a person.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to point that out to let you know that Shae's a real one.
I think that for me, what I'm trying to teach my son, like I said, I feel even with seeing how my mom was growing up, is she relied on a man. And it's finding the balance of teaching my son to care for your woman, right? Care for your wife, while still not just having someone who solely relies on you. But then again, that's a woman's perspective and a woman who is doing it alone, because as a man, you still want to feel needed, right? I know that
Yep.
we've had conversations like that.
Yep.
And I think you've shared that, right? Like, what does a man really want to feel to make him, you know, feel like the man,
Yep.
right? And then that comes down to like, are you being submissive? What is submissive to a man?
Right.
Right?
Yep.
Is it saying like, hey, yeah, you can take out the trash? You know, does that make you feel manly? Yes, you can open my door. I'm
Yeah.
absolutely fully capable of opening it, but you can open it if
Right.
it makes you feel like a man,
Right.
right? So it's finding that balance of how do you also teach him to, and I think that's why it's so important for me that his dad is present in his life, regardless of our situation, because I want him to find that balance. I know that I cannot teach him how to be a man. I am a woman, and that is not my role.
Yep.
I can only teach him, you know, how to be a decent human in society and what is a loving woman, you know, but I cannot teach him how to be a man.
Yeah.
And I guess that goes to your question earlier. Like, what can a man bring? I cannot teach him how to be a man.
Yeah. See, real one. You know what I'm saying? That's some, but going back to the faith thing as well, too, right? Like, faith to me, in some sense, becomes true when tested, right? And it's like you said, when you had your child, you were tested in a way, and it forced you sort of into a more faith-based position because there's this new human being that's never been on the planet or in the universe before, and you have the responsibility of raising the child, right? And you also know that you can't control the child's mind. You can't make them do what you want them to do, right? You can do your best to teach them and discipline them, but that doesn't guarantee that they're going to listen, right?
Absolutely.
And especially long time, you also have the long term in play as well too. And if you're not even consciously thinking about it, you know that if I don't raise my son right, my daughter right, they're going to grow up and eventually they're going to be of age where they can be, where they'll be held responsible and accountable for their actions, right? And so it does force you into this place where you're just like, okay, like a lot of what I've learned in my life, you can maybe even say it was conceptual because you're out here kind of everybody's out here doing their thing or whatever, you know, you're kind of moving how you want to move. And then when you have a child, you're like, oh, like I have to like really hope and pray that something's going to work, especially because I know how I was. And a lot of people go there too, right? Like, well, I know it, you know, my mom and dad tried to teach me these same things and I didn't really care until now. Like you really have to care now. And so that's always interesting to me too. Yeah. As someone who doesn't have a child. So
I think that faith absolutely played a huge part of my life in when my son was born, you know, with the dynamic of me not being with his father. I mean, it was extremely hard, you know. I mean, that's real science and faith together because like postpartum depression is extremely real, you know. Like the amount of hormones and the way it affects your body, like also when you're nursing. I was nursing. I mean, I don't know if you know anything about nursing, but like you're supposed to nurse like every 2 to 3 hours, right? So think about it, you're not getting any sleep.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But then in order to produce milk, you need sleep. You need to be hydrated, but then you forget to drink, you forget to eat because you're not just raising this child, right? And so, you know, that postpartum depression is extremely real. And then it came down to like, all I could do was pray, right? I'm trying to beat the science of hormones and everything with my faith, right? Like that's literally how that's the only way I can really paint it out. Is like you're trying to beat it with faith and just pray and just pray. And, you know, that whole idea, it is cliche as it can sound, right? God wouldn't give me something I cannot handle because I was like, I am in the perfect position, right? I know that financially and physically I can take care of my son. And so I really relied heavily on my faith to get through that depression and just keep my son safe at all time, you know, at all costs. Yeah. So, I mean, faith and science, you can't separate it. You literally, I don't think you can separate it.
Yeah, you really can't. Like, it is my position as well, too, that, like, I do believe that God is real. And I believe, like the Bible tells us, God created everything, heaven and earth, right? So everything that we find on earth will have some essence of God in it or present in it. That all things basically ultimately lead to the ultimate truth, which is God. And so I think we talk about children development, conception, all the way through to when a child is now ready to start their own family, right? There's all of these elements that are at play. Like you said, there's only but so much science, we can rely on. And really, science is just a tool, right? It's just a tool of observation. And then we kind of get a good sense for how things operate. And then we try to do our best to,
Yeah.
you know, manipulate it as best we can based off of an observation, right? Um, and hopefully you can build some model that will give you a good, right, which is something human beings have always done, right? Like it's just trial and error. You see how stuff works and you try it and it doesn't work and you continue, right? That's just the building
That's
blocks
life.
of life.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
So
life.
but the faith thing is more elusive for people because I think, again, people tend to think that it's a religious term only. Some people do, at least. And so I think these moments when you have children, it definitely pulls that out and you become more and more.
Absolutely.
I think people return to faith after they have kids. I think there may be some statistic out there that supports that idea that people return to faith after they have kids because of some of the things that you're talking about, right? Like, just like,
I will say that I think there's also this misconception of faith that, if you believe in God, everything's just perfect. And when their life is like not perfect, it's, well, God, why did God do this to me? And it's like, well, everything, again, it comes out, everything is a matter of perspective. Right. And I will say that it has brought my son's father's faith back. He didn't have that. And I think that's something I absolutely value because, again, as a man, I can't teach him to be a man. Yeah. And I think that, if we talk about faith, that is his role, right? As a father and as a man, to teach him to be a man of God. Not just a man of God. Yeah. Right. That's something I can't teach him.
Yeah. What was it? What was the thing, if you can remember or put into words even, what was the thing that made you realize that you couldn't teach your son to be a man? Like, was there a thing that you like, because as a single mom, right, you're just like, okay, well, I'm going to raise my child. And at some level, you're just like, well, I have to teach him.
I think we need to tell the people first, because I don't know if you're aware, but single mom is apparently a debatable topic. There's a certain, apparently, okay, I say I'm a single mom. Sorry, I say I'm a single mom because I am single and I am a mother. But to some people, a single mother means that the father is not present. So we're just going to put that out there, that my son's father is very present in his life. Yeah. However, we are not together. The only other way to put that is we are co-parents, right?
If you haven't picked up on that, she's talked about it a lot.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I say single parent, a single mother, it is because, we are not together. Right. But the question was, when did I realize that?
Yeah, when did you realize that you couldn't teach your son to be a man?
When I realized, I think, so as I was pregnant, and we were around the area where, no, my son was already born, where we realized we weren't going to work out, right? I thought back to my childhood, and not having, really my mother present or my father present made me realize, like, no, my mom's role was to teach me to be a woman. My dad couldn't teach me to be a woman. He is a man, right? There's certain things he cannot teach me. And so, as I was trying to navigate our co-parenting life, I knew that I had to put my differences aside, because there are things that I cannot teach my son that my father couldn't teach me. And I thought it was so important that, he have both his parents present, because in how I spoke about his dad was so important to me, because I knew that growing up, I didn't want to change the way he felt about his dad. That wasn't my job. It was his father's job to, whoever his father is and whoever he sees his father as, is the image his father showed to him. That is the model his father was to him. And I never felt like it was my job to speak on who his father was, let alone be his father's role.
Yeah. That's such an interesting thing. Do you think a lot of women who have kids, do you think they know that, or do you think they realize that? Because I don't think a lot of women would admit or say what you said.
It's gonna come down to the maturity, right? I could see how easy it is when you're not getting along with your child's parent to just take it away, right? Because when you're mad at someone, the last thing you want to do is face them, talk to them, right? So I think you have to be at a level where you're focused on truly what your child needs. It's not easy to do. It is not easy at all. I think a lot of people speak like, oh, I love, how you guys parent. It's like, but it takes a lot of mental work. It takes a lot of faith. It takes a lot of prayer, to ask God to help you focus on what matters, focus on what you control, right? Someone once told me, if you cannot change the situation, change your attitude about it. I knew that I could not change the fact that we were not going to be together, right? But what can I change? I can change how I approach the situation, how I handle the situation, rather. I was in a better place, with my life set up. His dad was transitioning out of the military. And I knew that I had to take the lead. There were a lot of times I had to bite my tongue for the sake of allowing his father, to be the man.
That's wisdom right there. Because I think there is a natural instinct that we all have, I think, man or woman. I think for men, it does manifest itself in a certain way, and I think in women, it manifests itself in another,
Absolutely.
right? And so for you have enough wisdom to be like, you know what, I want to, some people would say, control the situation, but I understand, given that I have a child and I need to consider their development and what they need to see.
Yeah.
It's very wise for you to be like, I'm going to take a step back and let, his father do it. And that's wisdom right there. Like, seriously, like not everybody can do that. Some people just emotionally respond and they react in the moment, and then they don't recognize the impact that that's having on their child. And sometimes they probably never really understand the impact that it has on their child. Maybe their child grows up and, doesn't understand something, or, struggles with something that they were doing for a long time, but they just weren't aware of. And so to be aware of that just truly is, I think God present in it.
Yeah, like emotional intelligence, right? A lot of people lack that. And especially when you're in a situation when, it's easy to, like, when you don't have a kid, right, break up and never talk to each other again. But when you have to face, someone who's hurt you or someone you've hurt, that's not an easy thing to do, right? And so I think having that emotional intelligence is extremely important, which is another topic that can we can go on about.
Did you when you recognized that you weren't going to be living with your son's father, did you have a moment of fear? Did you like, oh,
Absolutely.
like what? Okay, so what was that fear?
Really
like,
scared.
What did you experience?
I was really
Some girls
scared.
be like, yeah, I'm happy he's gone. You know what I mean? Like, when you take their approach, where it's just like,
it wasn't even that. I was scared. I was like, and that's when faith kicked in. Like, faith absolutely kicked in, because I think my biggest fear was I had heard so many stories about postpartum depression. People hurt themselves, people hurt them kids, right? Hurt their kids. And that's what I was afraid of. It seemed like I would have no control over, like, my mind. And when postpartum depression really hit me at one point, it really did feel like that. Like, you have no control over what's happening. And, but at the end of the day, I would just pray, like, please, God, let me keep my child safe. But I was scared. I mean, I didn't even make as much as I, do now. But in that moment, I'm a very, like, easy, I don't have a high maintenance life. I'm not a high maintenance person. So I knew that at the end of the day, I was going to do whatever I needed to do to keep a roof over my son's head and food in his mouth.
Yeah.
Like, at the end of the day, it didn't matter what I had to do.
Yeah.
But I was absolutely afraid, because something I learned was, like, lack of sleep could really kill you. Like, it was the lack of sleep that was just, like, driving me crazy. Because like, now you're literally functioning on E.
Yeah.
No sleep, no energy, probably not getting food, not enough water, but you have to keep feeding a child. So, I was absolutely scared. I can absolutely admit that.
Did you think that, like, the family dynamic not being together would have an impact on your son? Like, just him not seeing or experiencing, mom and dad together?
Inevitably.
Yeah.
Yeah. I knew it would. Now, how it would impact him was going to depend on how we chose to proceed, right? That was going to depend on how I was going to parent with his father, right? There were a lot of times I had to be the bigger person. Now, we always say, like I said, I grew up with both my present parents not present. He grew up with his mom and dad. They're still married after 30 some years.
Mm-hmm.
We always said I was taught what not to do and he was taught what to do, right? Which also means there's things he's going to have to learn. Like you learn from making mistakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you've only been taught what to do, you had no errors in your life. That's also not the best way to learn, right? Which means you're ultimately going to have to make those mistakes somewhere along the way.
Yep.
And for me, I think that's what taught me the wisdom, right? Is learning from the mistakes of my parents,
right,
and now having to pay this way for my son.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew what a very toxic home, dysfunctional family looked like. And that made it easier for me to say, okay, what I know is I cannot speak. I must always speak well of his father.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no reason to not speak well of his father. Despite our circumstances, things just didn't work out. And that's
right,
all I could ever say about it.
right,
And I wanted my son to know that, like, I will always speak well of your father. And my idea was, how can I truly believed that I can still teach my son what love is, and hopefully he can have a family of his own one day, even if that's not what he grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
And so the goal was always, how can I still teach my son love, even if we're not under, say, one household?
Yeah. That's it. That's impressive because not every girl knows how to do that. Not every guy, man knows how to do that when you grow up in a circumstance that's not ideal.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people use it as an excuse.
Absolutely.
And they don't know how to proceed in life, even though they didn't have that example, right? And I fear that there are obviously way too many households that are like that. Mm-hmm. Do you think that was the faith in you? Like, do you think that was something you were born with, just to be able to see? Because again, like you grew up in an environment, some people say you don't know what you don't know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But you at some point took responsibility and you know what I mean? And be like, you know what? I don't want to be like that. And so you sought some kind of, I don't know if you read books or you look, you know what I mean? Like
ultimately it was faith, right? That's all I've ever known, right? As a child, I had a really rough childhood. And all I knew was pray. Like at the end of the day, all I knew was just pray and talk to God about it. And
power of prayer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so, I think that it was, it played a huge role I look back at my life, right? And I could say today I wouldn't change anything because I don't think I would be half the mother I am to my son if I didn't experience what I went through. And I've never regretted anything. At a very early age, I think about 20, when I was 21, I went through a divorce, right? Mm-hmm. And up to 21, I think that was a very life-changing point in my life because I would blame my parents. I was like, they didn't teach me, what marriage was. They didn't teach me what good, love is supposed to look like.
Yeah. Which I think is totally fair, by the way.
Yes,
I think more people should confront their parents. like seriously. Like I think it's a real thing, like to confront your parents. It doesn't mean you have to like hate them or, you know what I mean? Like, because they have circumstances and things too that affect their life. But I think it's appropriate to say, Mom and Dad, these are some areas that you probably didn't do well.
And I think that at some point, I literally had to look myself in the mirror of like, when are you going to stop using it as an excuse, though? Mm-hmm. When does it become a crutch? And when are you going to say, this is why I'm going to do better, right? Mm-hmm. This is why I'm going to be better. Had I not went through, I don't believe I may have handled it the way I did, right? But it also came from wanting better. I think when people are in this situation, like you said, like when they come from a rough household and then they end up in a rough household themselves, it's because they don't know how to, like, break those generational curses, go through therapy. Yes, I'll admit I've had to go through therapy. And I think I recommend it to everybody because you have to be able to break past that. I come from a culture where like family is a heart of everything, right? Guam is very centered around culture and family. And it was like you do whatever for your family. We are family regardless if people do anything wrong to you. And I think drawing boundaries with people was a huge, break in that, even if that had to be my parents, right?
Yep.
But I think, ultimately it comes down to really just knowing like I wanted better.
Yeah. Let's go in this direction as well, too, because I think this is important. in the world today, like we were talking about faith and science. Science is starting to, you can probably say, is probably starting to overstep its place in the balance. We'll say that, right? Or rather, people are using science and overstepping a little bit into the world where I think it should not go, at least from my perspective. There's a lot happening right now in the world.
Absolutely.
We were talking a little bit about the roles and how today there's a little bit more of a balance, but still there's still factors that have to be considered.
Yeah.
Men and women are different, right?
Absolutely.
Women get pregnant, men don't, right? Like,
I hope science doesn't bring us to that point. That would be an interesting thing,
that would
though.
be an interesting thing.
I mean, because they like to say men can't handle what women can, right?
Right. That's what they say. but that's exactly so where I'm going. Do you think, or rather, what do you think the impact's going to be if we continue down that road, right? Where people start to use science in areas, and you talked about this earlier, when like you feel like women are kind of picking their children, you're kind of cheating a bit, right? In a sense, right? There is something about that feels a little bit unethical, immoral, or like it's cheating, or you're doing something that is not natural.
Absolutely.
I think faith is a natural part of the human experience, right? So if you can even look at it from that angle. What do you think the impact's going to be if we continue down this road where, you know what I mean? Like, do you think if the roles continue, if what's disregarded is the base level, the differences between men and women, if that starts to be disregarded, what do you think households are going to start experiencing? What do you think kids are going to start to experience?
I think that's ultimately going to come down to more like broken home. Well, I'm not going to say broken homes, but really people. But I think I got to say I think, yeah, ultimately it's going to lead to separate homes, a lot more separate homes. I think there's debate around what I'm about to say is that I think it also comes down to, though, people realizing that they do not have to stay in places that is not healthy for them or their children.
Yeah.
And I think that's also a different, perspective on things. Because, yes, ultimately people, they say our grandparents or whatever, they stayed together because, they had no other choice. But, and they pretty much relied on each other, right? Maybe the grandmother didn't work, so she solely relied on her grandfather, our grandfather. I was talking to someone and they said, their husband had cheated several times. Then she looked at me and said, but he can take care of us. Right. And so she was like, you got to pick your battles.
Yep.
So that was interesting for me because I don't think that's what it is. But what would that, if she chose not to, what does that ultimately lead to? A separate home, right? So I think, and then carrying on all those roles on your own. If you can, my situation is different. I don't think my situation is, there's many of them out there where you can still, each parent can lead as their role in a separate household. But I think that's what it would lead to.
Yeah, but it does require, like, if you have if there's ever a time to have faith, like strong faith, is if you have a two-parent household, like a separate household, right? It requires faith in the two-parent household, but if they're separate, it requires a lot of this wisdom you're talking about, right? But that ultimately might even be against, right? Because if you have a separate household, you have a single mom and she's not wise. Some of the stuff, like you were saying, like, okay, she'll start to practice in her life taking on some of what you would consider traditionally men roles, right? And then so now it's going to be harder for her to practice and show her child how to be soft in certain areas when it's appropriate, right?
Yeah.
That kind of thing will start to happen, right? So you need to have more faith when that's the case. Are you going to say that? Yeah.
Well, I've always thought about that. I thought, what is harder? Co-parenting or actually staying together? I think if we had someone married who has children inside a home, that would be a really good perspective.
Yeah.
Or someone who's done both, right? Like if I was to get to a point in life where I'm with somebody, I think reflecting on that, because I think they are equally hard. I think being in a household, and taking care of your family and being a parent, I always say it, I'm like, I don't know how to do it all. I was like, I don't think I know how to be like a wife and work full time and pay attention to your kids. Like there's only 24 hours in the day, only 24,
right.
and have time for yourself.
Yeah.
I commend parents who can do it all, But I think the question is really like, which is harder?
Yeah. And I guess it would be the perspective from the parents' perspective, right? And then there's the kid's perspective, right? It's just like from a child's perspective, having two parents in the household, right? Even if there's conflict among the parents, it's still good for a child to see healthy conflict and how to resolve healthy conflict, right? And if you're separate, then they may associate, you know what I mean, like disagreements and conflict, and it may associate it, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like it could really have an impact at that level, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's what I think, you know, for my son, my dynamic, it's also kind of making him realize, like, I don't want him to think it's just perfect, right? Like, yes, like you have a, you know, a good point. It's like disagreement is important. You learn how to solve conflict, right? He doesn't need to hear everything in between.
Right.
But I think when he gets to a certain age, like letting him understand, right, you know, what brought us here and how we overcame, you know, and just letting him know that he was always the center of, you know, how we proceeded, and that it was always in love, right? The goal was always to teach him love despite what our household looked like.
Right.
Because I also don't want that for him. Should he ever be in a situation that he is, you know, very, you know, going through it, you know, don't say you're going to stick around for the kids, and then now they're just in this, you know, I've heard of people whose parents been married for years, 20, 30 plus years, and then they grow up and they're like, they should have never been married at all. Is that love, right? What do they learn from that?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. You said something that I thought was interesting, and it triggered a thought in my mind. I think one way of, and I'm gonna bring this full circle. One way of defining bad, negative, or evil in my mind is the perversion of good, or when sort of you take the purpose of something and you pervert it, right? You misuse against what the design was intended for or something like that, right? And so I think the family unit and the order of a family unit from a faith-based perspective, and you can even argue from a scientific perspective, and a lot of the information and data is coming out about these kinds of things and what happens when we have separate households, when, you know what I mean, that kind of thing. I think when that is disturbed, it introduces an element of chaos and confusion for the child.
Absolutely.
Which then you don't have, you're sort of taking the guardrails off of direction, and you're saying, okay, well, you can still make it work, obviously, but it requires both people to be probably more in sync than they would have otherwise had to have been.
Absolutely.
Like,
Absolutely.
you know, which is the irony, right? It's just like we couldn't make it work together, but now we need to be more in sync with, you know what I mean? Like like when I was growing up, like my parents were also separated, and me and my brother, we spent time at both of our parents' house. We were 2 weeks here, 2 weeks there, right? Like I don't know what the conversations, most of the conversations, I did experience some conversations between my parents, right? But I'm sure there had to be parent-teacher conferences. What did they eat? Who have they been around? All those types of things had to have been communicated at some level.
Absolutely.
Or you're potentially introducing a lot of unknowns into, like, you have no idea for 50% of the year where your child is, and he has no idea what 50% of his child, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you're like, you're probably even teaching your kids probably opposing things if you're not in sync.
Absolutely.
And that's super confusing for kids probably, right? And so it's dangerous, right? But the irony is that you kind of have to be more.
Yeah, I will say, you know, his dad has been great with that. One thing is, you know, we go to when the daycare has something, we go together. When I say, hey, we're learning letter A this week. Now we're both teaching letter A, you know, and so we both do. You know, we're very, and I will say it takes a lot of communication. Like, communication got to be top notch. Like you said, the irony of it, communication got to be extra top notch.
Yeah. Do you think being pen pals would help? Like if you just wrote each other letters like this week, or that should be like a ledger.
Thanks
like,
to technology,
hey, like these is
science, we got text messaging, you know, different apps these days. We can sync our calendar.
Book. Yeah. Just let me know what's happening so
Science.
I can sync.
Science is working with us.
Exactly. We're out of time. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's like episode has been absolutely amazing.
I had fun.
It developed, sort of broad, and we got narrow, and I think it's been a very fruitful conversation, and hopefully everybody who's watching's got a lot out of it. Shae will be back for sure. Always
we
like
got
to
a lot
give.
to discuss. We got lots to discuss.
Yes, we do.
You pick a topic, we can expand.
But I'd like to give the guest the last word. So anything you want to tell the people, of course, if you need to replug your social media, you can do that. Again, if you need somebody to train you, Shae.
No. I think really the takeaway is more just the focus of faith. Mm-hmm. And I think for anyone in my situation, a similar situation, really seeking, I think therapy is so important, right? Communication has to be there, and just remembering that, you can still teach love in separate house, despite the circumstance. The goal is always to teach love. What does love look like? Our kids didn't ask to be here, and we want to just raise them to know that despite the circumstances, like, they're important. And yeah.
Well, again, thank you so much.
It's
been an absolutely amazing topic and discussion. Of course, like we always say, thank you for joining us. Make sure you comment at the bottom. There were a couple of things I was like, hey, somebody Google this. If you Google it, extra points for you. I might, give you $1 or something. But obviously, always, tell us what you think. Get involved in the discussion. If there was something you agree with or didn't agree with, feel free to let us know what that is. And make sure you follow Shae. She's awesome. Like I said, she will be back. Always keep in mind the questions we always ask. Why do we think what we think, and how do we think it? And that's the end of this episode. But the eternal never ends.